I never thought we would come to this point, but I guess that's the beauty of these conversations, is that I've realized the transformative power of art is really in trusting where your true curiosities and interests lead you, and not expecting that the destination you get to next is the destination that you need to arrive at, but that destination will give you insight into many other destinations you may need to go first before you get to wherever it is you think you need to get to, which you don't even know exists yet.
This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte, identifying your blocks and demystifying your struggles so that you can claim your own path and make your life a work of art.
All right, welcome to another podcast episode with Brandon and Evan as we talk about some stuff. The transformative power of art. That's what we titled this. Yeah, it's interesting when you're an artist, when you're creating, when you're actually trying to do something new, when you're pushing yourself into what is actually creative, meaning that you're not just trying to copy something or be cool or, do something like, oh, I liked kind of like what they did, so I'm going to do what they did. But you maybe it was you were inspired what they did. And so then you kind of had maybe somewhere to go with it. You thought maybe it could go further or different or another direction. What's really cool about that and what we want to kind of discuss today, I think, and maybe Evan will add some extras to this, but is that there's a transformative element when you push yourself outside of it. Now, I was talking with a fellow writer and we were discussing story concept. And one thing that they kind of helped me understand was that when you're asking a question, now stay with me here because we were talking about screenwriting, but I think this relates to other mediums as well. But we're talking about when you're asking a question, you're going to know if that's actually a high concept or an original concept or an interesting concept. And it's kind of like, what would happen if this was the case? And maybe it's something you've never seen and never looked at before. And so he pointed out the idea, and I mean, someone, by all means, I've been thinking about it, I might write this, but an example would be, okay, you have a zombie apocalypse, but what if your main character is blind? Have you seen that before? And how would that look and how would that play out? And there's something transformative if you went out and explored that idea. And this is I think an interesting thing to discuss, because where do we move as artists from being just a copy to actually pushing ourselves into the realm of the unknown and into the exploration and into that, what ends up being transformative, not even by intention, but just because it's new, because anything new is actually in essence transformative for us because we've never been there. So we are transformed by entering into the unknown, entering into the new. So that's something I'm kind of interested in maybe seeing if we can explore. Evan, do you have anything to add to this?
I probably do, if I were to give it some thought. Yeah, when you had mentioned a couple of things pre-recording that made me think, yeah, this would be a fascinating topic to get into, because there are these moments in different art forms where someone comes along and they change the game as well. I mean, so I think that there's a number of different levels this can work on, and I think also just in some ways a general exploration of the power of art to transform and to be provocative and to make people think and to make people understand something in a new way. Art is one of the most powerful things that we have in humanity that can do that. And I think it can happen on the individual level. Like there are pieces of art in whatever medium that exists, and For one person, it's the most incredible, extraordinary, life-changing thing that they've ever experienced. And to another person, it's just, okay, yeah, whatever. And then there's sometimes these moments where artists do something that changes things for everybody, that are so massive in their effect that kind of everybody stands up and takes notice. And in a way, we say, okay, this is where we begin now. This is now in some ways the bar that has been set for excellence in this field. And something else that you said that I want to touch on as well, which is that, I don't know if creating something like that is something that you have any control over necessarily. I think that you can push yourself to take yourself into a territory that you've never gone before, but you have no idea what kind of effect that is going to have out there in the world to your audience. You have no idea. But that doesn't make it unimportant. And I think that that doesn't mean that there's also not things that we can't be aware of that help our art to achieve that kind of authentic, genuine honesty, vulnerability, thoughtfulness that doesn't necessarily mean that your art will make an impact, but those things certainly have to be there in order for them to have an impact. So it's one of those things. It's like art, there's no guarantees of what it will do, but there are certain things that if you don't do this, you will probably not ever have kind of that sort of result. You will never sort of achieve that level of impact on your audience if some components aren't there. So maybe that's something we can get into as well. And something else, I'll say one last thing in what you were saying, was that just jumped into my head. It's standing on the shoulders of giants. And how, that's really where all of us, anyone who's ever done something transformative with their art, was standing on the shoulders of somebody who came before them. And if you're an artist, you can do the same. You can stand on the shoulders of giants and of your heroes, so to speak, learn from what they did, how they did what they did, and then get into touch with your own voice and see what you can do. You take that kind of inspiration. For me, sorry, I know I said it was going to be the last thing I was going to say, but apparently not. My acting hero is Daniel Day-Lewis. Anyone who's listened to the show enough times has probably heard me talk about the man. But for me, his performance in There Will Be Blood is that for me is that's the bar of I'm I don't know if I've ever seen a performance better than that in my life. And for me, it's that's where we begin. That's for me that's the vision of not stealing what he's doing in that performance, but the place that he went to as an artist to do that. That's the bar for me, right? And sometimes there's these things that he's my sort of giant in many regards, who I'm trying to stand on the shoulders of. So anyhow, there's these moments, they're transformative for us on a micro and macro level. These are all things that I'm kind of thinking about going into this conversation. So I am now done, Brandon.
All right. Well, let's talk about this Shoulders of Giants quickly as we move and navigate through this one. I think that when you are in the initial stages of creating, and you don't have much experience with what's out there and who's done what and what's available, you can have a truly authentic creative thought that's original for you, but it's not necessarily original for everyone else because someone else came across that discovery somewhere else, and maybe they even commercialized it and made it mainstream somehow, and you just don't know it exists. So you think you're creating something new, and really, like, it's already been done, it's already out there. But for you, in your experience of creating it, was new, and there's something wonderful about that. And I think when you're a new artist, sometimes you might think, oh, I have this really original idea, this really cool thing, and then you start to find out, oh, this has already been done, this isn't that original. First, it's important to note that for you, it was original. You came to that discovery without being aware of what was out there, and you had the same experience of what it is to come across something new. And now, like in the film industry, like if you want to write screenplays or make movies and things like that, maybe even you could say write like novels and plays and whatever, it's relevant. But you do need to have a little bit of an idea of what's been done already. And you do need to have a little bit of an understanding of the history of storytelling, filmmaking, and these crafts, because people made discoveries and they shared them with all of us. And it's important that you understand what they did and how they did it and what happened, because it will help you to take what they did and take it further. And it can always be taken further. You have no idea how far it can go. None of us do, because once someone, and I want to bring it back to what you said earlier, Evan, you talked about raising the bar. Every time we have a new transformative artistic experience, the bar has been raised, but that doesn't mean the bar can't be raised again. And most importantly, it doesn't mean that the bar can't be raised again by you. Mm-hmm. But you need to have an understanding of where the bar actually is so that you can understand where it would actually be raised to. Because if you have no reference point of how high it is and where it's at, and if you want to use that kind of analogy or reference, then you don't really know where you're pushing things into the new, right? So, but on an individual experience of creating art, if you lived, if all of society was gone and we never had a history and we never had anything and no one was there to remember the history we had, and it was all new again, it would all be new again because we would all be again experiencing it new, and the experience doesn't change. The new experience doesn't change. So let me bring this all back around, because I talked about a bunch of stuff. As an individual experiencing artist, you can have a powerfully transformative experience as a creative creating on your own. But if you want to transition that and share that with others, you need to understand what others have experienced through other people's art. And that's where you push out of your own bubble into the more collective bubble of what have we all kind of experienced as artists, because, or just viewers and audience members. And I think that's why often people will say, oh, have you read that book? Or have you seen that movie? And if you haven't, what they're saying is that there's a transformative experience there, and you should go out and get it because it was valuable for me. That's what they're saying, right? Mm-hmm. And then if you see it and you love it, then you also had their somewhat transformative experience. But if you didn't, probably what happened was their transformative experience was something you already had elsewhere. And so that wasn't so new for you. And that's why it wasn't as spectacular. And so it's very important, I think, as we navigate this, to understand the personal and the collective, because they're both relevant, they both matter, but they're different. And it's important because we're trying to navigate how to also be in a career, right?
Yeah. And you bring a lot of interesting things into this, and I want to bring in a few sort of just examples of maybe of how that sort of operates in action. So I'm going to try and combine a few of the things that we've been talking about all into one sort of one thing. So, when I was talking about Daniel Day-Lewis, and his performance in There Will Be Blood, to me, that's like the most extraordinary. That was a transformative performance for me as an actor. It changed it changed my concept of what is possible for an actor to do, and to achieve in a performance. And in an interview that I read many years ago with Daniel Day-Lewis, and it's where I take some of this language, where I took some of the language I've already used from, he said that for him, when he saw Raging Bull with Robert De Niro, he said for him, that was where the game changed for him. That was a transformative experience for him. He said, this is where we begin, is Robert De Niro in Raging Bull. I've seen Raging Bull. It's an incredible performance. I can recognize that collectively as being like, yes, I can see how, in a kind of way, how this was really powerful. But in some ways, especially with time and generational differences, when you are not immersed in the time and experience of what was going on then, you can sometimes lose context around some of these things. So it's like, I can recognize how powerful it was, but for me, Robert De Niro in Raging Bull was not like a transformative thing for me. But Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood, that was a transformative experience for me, right? So there's that sort of like collective and personal thing that's operating there. And probably if you looked into like Robert De Niro, he would say maybe something about Marlon Brando,
Right.
like when I saw Brando in this, that changed the game for me. And it wouldn't have been that for everybody, but was there somewhere else I was wanting to go with this, Brandon? Probably.
I mean, if you have another example, by all means. I think that was a really good one because it shows the lineage of these artists, right? And I do think there are a lot of artists, especially of that generation of De Niro, Pacino, and all those guys, who Marlon Brando was a very pinnacle point for a lot of people, who helped them transform into what they brought. And they brought this whole other new thing, but it was off of the shoulders of Marlon Brando, because Marlon Brando, who is my favorite actor of all time, for many reasons other than just his acting, by the way, but because he was someone who wasn't towing the line of the industry. And I think that's a very daring thing to do. It's a very challenging and daring thing to do. But all of these, sorry?
And divisive as well.
And divisive. Yeah. Yeah. And like, he didn't just do it to do it either, from what I understand. And I mean, look, I didn't know the guy, but I've read a bit, I've studied a fair bit about him and his psychology. And I think in some ways it wasn't even, he ended up this very iconic actor very much by accident. It was not intentional. I think he truly intended to do good work, but I don't think he ever even imagined that he would become an iconic part of our society and culture. Like, I think that a lot of that happened by accident, and he ended up there, and then he had to deal with it, which also opens up a whole other bag of monkeys, as far as like, what is that? And what is all that about? But like, let me put it this way. Dealing with fame was something that someone had to do for the first time. That wasn't always normal. Like in our culture right now, like apparently there's a test and they ask kids, and they did this like 5-10 years ago, and they asked kids, what do you want to be when you're older? And a lot of kids, actually a huge amount of them, said famous, which is such an interesting thing, because back in the day, no one would have ever said that. Like 20, 30, maybe even 10 years before, like people wouldn't have said, I want to be famous. And famous became a thing. It became a job. It became a career choice. Like, I'm going to be a famous person. That's going to be my career. Like back when Marlon Brando was around, if you said, I'm going to be a famous person, you would be looked at like absolutely sideways. Like people would maybe kind of get what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But it was a different world. And then,
there was some figures who would say like, I'm going to be a star.
Yeah,
I'm going to be a star one day.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. but they were kind of like a dime a dozen, you know, like you didn't have
Yeah.
a lot of people saying shit like that. Yeah.
But I mean, and you know, and it would be narrowed into, say, like an acting kind of thing, right? Or, you know, like be a star. But like now, you could be famous for, I don't know, knowing everything about a certain video game. And it's crazy. You could have like millions of followers, if not more, just
Yeah.
because you're an expert in some game that's created. And this happens for people and they make millions of dollars, and like all the power to them. But this was a lineage. And I think that's really important to understand the transformation, right? Because as we're talking about, we transformed into this, right? Like this was through artists transforming through art, the possibility for us to live and have these options, you know?
Yeah. And it's happened over and over and over again throughout human history.
Yes.
Where, yeah, like, and that's another element of this conversation that we haven't really touched on deeply at any point. And I don't know if, like, you know, I don't have any sort of, you know, I'm no art history major or anything like that, but, you know, I can still recognize that, you know, anything that I have come across, it's just like, oh yeah, like these things came along and they just changed things. They can change societies. Like art can change entire cultures and societies. For so many reasons. Art can be used to reflect and propagate the powers of the time. Art can also be used to, you know, as a form of rebellion against powers of the time, you know, and that's a pretty extraordinary thing. I've never seen it, but there's apparently some documentary that someone told me about that sounded fascinating, but it was basically how the fall of the Soviet Union and the Berlin Wall had more to do with the Beatles' White Album that came out. There's an interesting argument that says that the Beatles are actually responsible for the fall of the Berlin Wall. You know, but just like it's that you can even make that argument, you know, shows the power of what art can do.
Yeah. And, you know, and I think it's important to kind of come back to that one thing too, is that just because that transformed something doesn't mean that the artist intended to make that transformation. I think there's something that's really important about, you know, not to put so much pressure on yourself as an artist to be like, I got to do this thing that's going to change the world. Like, I really do believe that if you go into an authentic, truthful place and you're really trying to explore something you care about, something that matters to you, you will inevitably create transformation, whether you know it or not, like whether you intend it or not, because it really does begin within. Like, and you don't know what you're transforming in another as you're working through the transformation in yourself. So like, I don't know, like I referenced the script many times. It's a script that I wrote called Love Lost, and I wanted to share an experience, and I wanted to explore something about love that I really was not too clear about at the time. But I started to give a little bit of an understanding of where this came from. I really started to, let me give you a little history. I was in a relationship where I thought I was truly in love. And I realized as I had gone down the road of this relationship that it was not what love really was. At least I don't think that's what love was today. But at a certain time, I kind of thought, oh, this is what love is. And after that kind of toxic relationship, I walked away from that going, you know, if people don't accept me or I don't accept them for who they really are, then do we even have love at all? Like, or are we just in love of the image or the idea of each other? And really, that person and myself will never feel love because we'll never really be loved. And I was like, well, further, and then that led to the next question is like, why am I not truly myself, and why are other people not truly themselves all the time? Like, why don't we just come to the table as we truly are? And because we're ashamed, because we're scared, because we're worried that if people knew who we really were, they wouldn't accept us, they wouldn't like us, they wouldn't love us. And so through a love story, I wanted to explore that, and I wanted to see, could I find an exploration of love, real love, where people really accepted each other and like saw each other for the worst and still were like, and I didn't know the answer. And I still even to this day, I don't know the answer, but the audience experience of the screenplay was very transformative. And I know this because I got a lot of people have written back to me and come back to me from it and told me what happened. And I do think that in our culture, we all secretly want to be loved for who we really are. And I think most of us, or a lot of us, or maybe at least some of us, we don't know if anyone would ever love us if they knew who we really were. And that exploration, even if it only transforms for a few people, I think it makes a really beautiful impact on them. It made an impact on me. I didn't know what it would do for other people, but it was a genuine exploration with the story. So, I mean, who knows where that leads, if that ever becomes anything, but it was an experience of transformation for me through art.
I think that is possibly an essential piece, and one of those essential pieces that you can't fake, which is why I think terrific and amazing art is, doesn't just happen all the time and everywhere. Like there are so many little traps that get in the way of an incredible art happening, because it is kind of a happening, and just listening to you talk about this, helps me to get clear on something where I go, yeah, like no matter what medium it's in, all of my favorite pieces of art have this element of exploration in it. It's like the artist is having a dialogue with me. They're having a conversation with me, and they're saying, I don't know. They're saying, I don't know. I wanted to look at this thing, and I wanted to have a conversation about this. And it started with myself, and now you're watching it, or you're listening to it, or whatever. And now you're exploring this thing with me now too. Right. And because anytime I come across it, again, in any medium, whenever there's, a piece of quote unquote art that is, it's really trying to make me think something. It's really it's trying to make me look at something in a specific way, or it's like, oh, this was communicating, once it gets pinned down to something and it's just like, that's what I'm trying to, this is what I'm saying to you with this piece. There's something about that turns me off about it a little bit, because in a way it does become a little bit of propaganda at that point. It becomes propaganda from the artist, which is just like, because it no longer contains that element of exploration and with me. It's like I'm being told something, you know what I mean? Like it's me like, no, this is what I'm telling you. Right.
Yeah.
This is what it is.
It's like that preachy. It's like preachy, but it's not. Yeah. It's not. I think when something becomes preachy, it's because it doesn't feel real to the writer or creator or artist or musician. It feels like they're trying to tell you something without being in it with you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But if they're in it with me, I'm willing to go wherever you want to go, because I do feel like you're having a conversation. I feel like you're, and I mean, in a novel or sometimes screenplay, that can be a little more explicit, I think. But like in a song, you hear the musical tones and the energy and the way they've gone, and you feel like I don't know, like say what you will, but like Adele creating that song like Hello, I actually felt like she took me to Hello. I felt like she took me to where she was trying to go. And I think that's part of the reason why that song was such a hit. I actually don't feel like that song was put on. I actually felt like she was genuinely singing from her heart when she said, when she was saying those things. And there was something about that song that I know for a lot of people, but like for me, I was just like, yeah, like there's something that seems viscerally true about this, and I mean, we'd use tons of examples, but I didn't feel like it was like you're trying to manipulate me with the emotion of how you're such a great singer and you can use these musical tones. Like I felt like you felt what you're asking me to feel with you. And that is what made it transformative.
Well, it's like you're listening to a human being who's trying to figure something out.
Yeah.
And I think that's such an important thing for that transformative thing to happen. It's being invited into that thing as opposed to being like, as you're sort of saying, and maybe for lack of a better word, but being preached to, right? It's like, I'm not being preached to, I'm listening, or I'm taking in something of another human being trying to figure out something big. They're trying to, and that's in so many ways life, like we're all just, human beings trying to figure some shit out. And when that quality is imbued in art, it's like I'm kind of invited into it, and I'm like, yeah, like I'm trying to figure things out too. I'm trying to, figure out these complicated issues of love and death and relationships and success and like big questions. I think are always in some way a part of art, of great art, big questions. Which is maybe, I'm thinking just in terms of storytelling and stuff as well, where it's like, it's important. When I started learning about writing scripts and stuff like that, it's like theme was one of the things. Like, your story's got to have some kind of a theme to it, which I get. That's like an important thing. It can help you get to some of those bigger things, those bigger life things, and get that injected into your script. Like, what is this actually really all about? And sort of that is that theme. And like underneath all of the kind of crazy things that might happen, what's underneath it all for us to walk away with from this story? And in many ways, I'm kind of going like, it might be better to, when trying to figure that out, is that comes out as a question. Like the theme is some kind of a question about something, so that when you're writing, it's like you are in the middle of that exploration. And to think of, one of the most famous examples of in cinema history, Citizen Kane. The theme you could say to that one is, what profits a man if he gains the world but loses his soul?
Yeah.
Right? It's a question mark. Right? It's not trying to like necessarily preach something, but it does say something to us at the same time, and it does make us think about something and question something. And Citizen Kane's one of the, arguably the greatest film of all time, according to some people, right?
Well, the American Film Institute thinks so.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I actually would love to read something from a novel, if you don't mind.
I do
take
mind,
a minute,
Brandon.
but I think it's worth it. I think considering what we ventured into, this might be a good. So this is from the novel Gone Girl, and written by Gillian Flynn, and it's an incredibly good novel. I've seen the movie. I think the movie's exceptional, but this novel is wonderful. But there's this moment in it, and it really stuck out to me. Like I made a note of it because it stuck out to me so much, and I think it's so relevant to art. But I'll read it out, and then and then maybe we can talk about it, or we can just leave it. We'll see what happens. Our society was utterly, ruinously derivative. We were the first human beings who would never see anything for the first time. We stare at the wonders of the world, dull-eyed, underwhelmed. Mona Lisa, the pyramids, the Empire State Building, jungle animals on attack, ancient icebergs collapsing, volcanoes erupting. I can't recall a single amazing thing I've ever seen firsthand that I didn't immediately reference to a movie or a TV show or a fucking commercial. You know the awful sing song of the Blaze, seeing it. I've literally seen it all. And the worst thing, the thing that makes me want to blow my brains out is the secondhand experience is always better. The image is crisper, the view is keener, the camera angle and the soundtrack manipulate my emotions in a way reality can't anymore. I don't know that we are actually human at this point. Those of us who are like most of us, who grew up with TV and movies and now the internet. If we're betrayed, we know the words to say. When loved ones die, we know the words to say. If we want to play the stud or the smartass or the fool, we know the words to say. We're all working from the same dog-eared script. It's a very difficult era in which to be a person, just a real actual person, instead of a collection of personality traits selected from an endless automat of characters. And if all of us are play acting, there can be no such thing as a soulmate because we don't have genuine souls. It had gotten to the point where it seemed like nothing matters because I'm not a real person and neither is anyone else. I would have done anything to feel real again. Anyway, the reason why that stood out to me so much was because I think as artists, this is one of our main struggles. We pull a lot of our creativity from the copy of the things we see, and we don't go out and live. We don't go out and pull from our life, and we don't look within. We look at movies and we look at TV and we look at all these other artists and all these other things in the media and whatever and what we're told. And so I think a lot of what you and I try and talk about, Evan, and something that's very important to me is like, what if you looked within? You know, what's a question you have? Not answered by television, not answered by movies, not answered by songs, not answered by the things you love. That's your art. You know, that's where you're real. That's where you're you, and you have something that no one else has given us yet. And if you started, instead of just copying and knowing what to say and knowing what to do and knowing who to be, quote unquote, maybe you would find out who you are, you know? And I think the transformation is when you stop the copy of everything and you begin to explore the unknown kind of essence and exploration. I meant to say exploration and essence at the same time. Mm-hmm. If you went and explored what that is of you, you know, like the, you know, and like going from your own experience, like real experience with people and life and things that have happened, and like looking at that like it actually mattered, because it does, you know? And like, yeah, the movie that you saw with the soundtrack is beautiful and it's cool and it's wonderful. But like, your life is also wonderful, and your experience of it and your interpretation of it matters in your art and your expression. And you don't need to undermine it just because many great artists have given us a way to be and a way to live and a way to act. But that is still a copy, you know, for us, until we move into the transformative realm of the unknown and the exploration.
Thank you for sharing. That's one hell of a quote. It's chilling. It's a very chilling quote. And one that, you know, it's a very strong point of view on something that, you know, I'm myself am maybe not as cynical as the character or author is in that type of thing. However, there are many things that are said and they're like, yeah, I do see that. I do agree with much of what is being said in there. Really, what an incredible quote that really came from somewhere deep and personal. But you know, I've said on this podcast many times before something that one of my acting teachers used to say, which is, it's like, acting doesn't fuel your acting, life fuels your acting. And you can bring that across into like art as well. You know, it's just like life fuels art. Life fuels art. Yes, you can be inspired by, you know, the art of someone else, but usually that's because they've taken something from life, you know, in a kind of way. And I think that that's such an essential part of making anything artful in your life is the level of your engagement with your life, you know, like real engagement and taking care of the moment to moment details of your life and really paying attention to these things. And it's something I also tell a lot of my students as well. I tell them, like, drop the acting books sometimes. Like, yeah, acting books are great and those are wonderful, and there are things that you can pick up from it. But at a certain point, I'm like, I think that you are more served by picking up a book, you know, from, you know, Marcus Aurelius, pick up a book by Alan Watts, pick up a book by, you know, like any sort of philosopher or a poet or, you know, someone who really was diving into the questions of life and our existence. You know, like there is so much to be gained than just trying to how-to everything. Something that can provoke you to think, you know, not necessarily telling you what to think, but provoking you to think, provoking you and inspiring you to engage in your own life in a more deep and profound way. You know, because I think that is something that great art also does. It's like somebody who's had, it's a person or a group of individuals who have had some sort of intimate and direct experience with some part of their life that they've managed to communicate in some way. And don't get me wrong, that's value, because that is kind of the rub, you know, in terms of that quote that you just shared, right? Which is, there's this sort of knock on all of these, you know, mediums that we regularly ingest, you know, particularly stuff like, you know, TV and movies and things like that. We're receiving, we can be basically diminish ourselves to, that's really the only way in which we're experiencing life is through a screen. It's through like, as the quote was, like a secondhand, you know, a secondhand human, which is interesting because the first time I heard that expression was Jiddu Krishnamurti, which I just loved that articulation. But, you know, that's also one of the things, though, because a great piece of art, I think, can make you engage in your own life in a deeper way. Like, it can wake you up a little bit. And I think that's part of the real true power and the true transformative power of art is it makes you stand up and take notice of your life in a new way, or just of life in a new way. So it's kind of interesting because it's like, you know, in many ways, art becomes unnecessary at a certain point, right? Like, art is maybe just trying to remind us of something, trying to wake us up to something. And once we're there, it's like, well, what's the necessity of art really anymore? Just a question. I don't know. I still think art would maybe at that point, like, I'm just being hypothetical here. All right, let's say everybody was really awake and alive to their lives in an intimate way, which is basically, you know, you'd have a world full of enlightened people, essentially, right? And then art would maybe take on a new meaning. You know, it's like, it's not there to wake us up anymore. It's just a kind of a play. It's just a sort of a fun, it's just like a play to do in life. But as I understand art right now and how it functions in its most powerful way, is that it's like, it's kind of trying to open our eyes to the beauty and the extraordinary beauty of our lives as they are, and that's around us. I don't know if there was something else I wanted to add to that. I feel like there was something that I did, but yeah, I think that's where really the power of art is most transformative, at least as far as I'm aware of it right now. Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way, and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe.
Yeah, well, you brought up some pretty cool stuff there. Going back to the Gillian Flynn portion of that book. I mean, that is a character expressing a point of view about where they're at and all of this. But I do think that's a little bit of the writer coming through and sharing a little bit of their understanding of that character and their point of view of that as well. So they're in tandem, like working together through it. You know, I don't know Gillian Flynn as a person. I don't know who she is and how she thinks and what her world's like, but I read that part and I do think that she has an understanding of that feeling of just being a copy of everything. And I think when you're trying to create something, you know, there is a part of you that can feel like, if you really get honest with yourself, you can just feel like, am I doing anything original at all? Or is this all just a copy of a copy of a copy? And I'm just repeating, you know, and there's a humility in it, which I can kind of appreciate as a writer myself. Is like, you know, I have been caught in the copy of the copy of the copy and the cliche of the copy and all of that. Right. And I think it's an interesting thing when you begin to, you really try to break away from it, you know, and you realize like, okay, well, where am I pulling from? You know, like, am I pulling from something I thought was cool, or am I pulling from something that's like really somewhere to pull from in me that is just been left unnoticed and untalked about and uncared for, you know, and given no attention or nurture. And I think the other part of it, you know, something else you're bringing up is like, art is such a profoundly important part of our lives, but it's so important that we don't even notice it. And I'll make this argument because Netflix, Disney, all these streaming services, they're doing better than ever. And more movies are being made, more shows are being made than have ever been made ever. And people are consuming them at such a fast rate that they can't even keep up. And quality control is becoming an issue in Hollywood and with these distribution companies and services, because they are not able to keep up with the amount of content and the quality at the same time. And so a lot of really crappy, like just really poorly thought out, terrible shit is being made. But it's being made and it's making money, which is kind of like weird. And some of it, you know, is just getting made to get made because they need to make stuff. And so, you know, the thing is we have such a high demand for art in our lives, even low quality, crappy art, that we don't. All right. So we lost our recording there for a second. So it probably cut off in the middle of me talking. But
I'll do some editing magic.
Yeah, we'll do some editing magic.
That will minimize it, but
it is what it is.
Go ahead, Brandon. What were you?
Honestly, I forgot what I was talking about. So you know what? It is what it is. But I think the thing that I'm kind of taking away from this conversation as we're going down the avenue and figuring all of this out is that there is a certain element of exploration that leads to transformation for you as an artist. And if you explore something, if you push yourself to explore something that maybe hasn't been done by other artistic mediums, and you haven't seen it done before, it might be worth exploring. And someone we've had on the podcast before who, I think he's really developing in an incredible way as a writer. His name's Scott Smith, and we'll have him on again, I'm sure. But he pointed out to me the other day that, like, one of the most important things about story that he's discovered is that when you have a sense of what it is that you're trying to do, it doesn't really matter what medium, what genre, what form you're doing it in, because that message, and it's not just a message is the wrong word, but that exploration, that thing that you are trying to get to and go to, that's like internally true for you, can be done in a zombie movie. It could be done in a sad song. It could be done in a pop song. It could be done in a painting. But there's something that you are trying to push through your center. And it's not that you're trying to necessarily do it for everybody else, but you genuinely and authentically want to explore it. There may be something not just transformative for you, but something transformative for everyone else, and maybe in a very big way. And you might never know to the degree that it will impact others. But I think this is one of the things, I think why we're talking about this, at least why I'm talking about this in this conversation, my part in it, is that I would love to encourage artists to embrace their own interest, their own curiosity, their own thing that they want to give attention to, and understand that those things are valid, and they might seem absolutely meaningless and pointless. Like, who would care? And it doesn't really matter, because if you care, I can tell you that there's a very good chance that someone else out there cares. And there might be more than just someone else. There might be a lot of people. So it's worth going down that road and looking into it, And the other thing too is with art is never really finished. So sometimes you're going to create some projects that you're never going to share with the world. They're just going to be for you. You're just going to explore them till you're done with them. And then you're going to move on, and you're going to be like, I'm not really going to ship this, put it out, present it. I'm not going to do anything with it. But that might lead you to your next exploration. And I think that's an important part of this conversation, that sometimes you need to transform into your next discovery. And that's where art can be a good medium for helping you get there and find your way.
Man, that almost sounded like fantastic closing comments.
Well, maybe I won't have much for closing comments.
But maybe you will. Who knows?
Maybe I will. Maybe that transformed me into my closing comments. Yeah. Who knows? I don't know. Do you have anything that is pressing that you're thinking?
Yeah, I mean, there was this thing that came up earlier in the conversation, and I just had jotted it down on my pad of paper here. That's come up a couple of times, but this question of originality, this question of being original, and almost the unknowable quality of that, because in some ways, I suppose in some ways, the whole pursuit of trying to be original is a completely redundant one. It's like it's something that strikes me as being of little use of paying much attention to or giving much energy to, because on some level, nothing is original. Nothing you ever do will actually be original. Why? Because we are, as human beings, we are intimately in relationship to everything. Not just other people, but like to our environment, to the entire universe. We have this and so anything that kind of comes through us is in relationship to every form of nature that exists. So it's like everything is derivative from a certain point of view. Everything is derivative.
Yeah.
And in a way that's a kind of relief. I think that we can actually not be discouraged by that, but be relieved by that, because then it means that we can just get on with it. Just get on with doing what we're doing. And in another way, originality does 100% completely exist, because even though you are sort of 100% completely intimately related to everything that is, and influenced by everything that is, that means that you are also a kind of unique expression of all that is on another level as well, which means that in so many ways your job is just to get out of your own way, which I feel is so much of what this podcast is about, Brandon.
Yeah.
So much of what our conversations are about is just like, it's like, how can we just convince ourselves to get the fuck out of our own way and let ourselves create something, right? Let ourselves just explore, as we were talking about, right? Like, let yourself explore. What is that question that you have? What is something that you find genuinely fascinating, exciting, and go into that. I think that's why, like, very often some of the, one of the wisdoms I found through these conversations is just like, you've got to follow those feelings of excitement. You've got to follow those things creatively that excite you. Because there's no guarantee, but you have a hope of doing something original. Because there's something that's out of your control when you're working from that place. And I think that to me that's an essential, like I was saying, it's an exploration, but within exploration, exploration kind of implies a sense of being out of control. There is something not in your control, and that is essential to transformative art, because you have to be transformed by it, which means it has to be something that you don't know yet. Like what you're engaging in, there's got to be something that you don't know going into it. And that allows you to fully explore, to fully pay attention and create in the way that you need to, for it to be what it's going to be. So I think that was everything that I was going to say, but yeah, it was like, this question of originality, was something that I thought was really worth talking about, because not just for what we do on the show, but it's also something I've heard other people have conversations about. Like, what is it to be original? Is it even possible to be original? And so I thought that was worth a few words on it at the very least.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up, because actually that was a conversation I was having the other day with a writer friend of mine, and we were talking about this originality kind of concept a little bit, high concept, right? That's something you talk about a little bit when you're in the movie world, which is basically just an original idea that's very compelling and people want to see, and they're like, oh, that sounds interesting. But he was pointing out that it's like, yeah, this pursuit of high concept is like kind of what you're talking about. It's like you're trying to be original. You're like, I'm going to try to think of this great idea. And he was pointing out, it's like, yeah, but it all comes back down to like, what's the core thing you're wondering about? It all just comes back down to that. And then and then he was saying, and then there's really just a few tools of like, you could utilize to essentially do whatever you're trying to do. And we talked a little bit about that. And it's like, one thing though, I want to mention on this originality thing, and you were actually the one who brought this to my attention, which really kind of shifted me. And it happened months and months ago, maybe even a year ago, but I remember, maybe even longer. I remember you saying attention is magic, and you were bringing this up. And this was something that I'd not really given a lot of attention to. But you pointed out that attention is magic. And I walked away, I remember, from that podcast episode, and I thought about that a lot. And I was like, really, it is. Attention is magic, because it's like originality is really just, what are you putting attention on? That's all it really is. And I mean, basically, no one's ever put attention on this before. And then they go, but I'd like to. And so then all of a sudden you have high concept, because everyone goes, oh, like I never thought to put attention on that. And then once you do, people go, oh, that's interesting. I want to know about it. And so then, it becomes something that's compelling, because, and it's basically like, well, what, like, I think you do yourself a bit of a disservice when you go like, well, what is worth putting my attention on? And what could I put my attention on to be original and new and unique? And what does no one else put their attention on? And you just have to follow the lineage of your attention. This is what I've come to, is like, I was interested in hiking. And so then I started pursuing hiking, and then hiking made me go like, I ended up on a hike where it was literally all ice, and I could barely walk like 3 inches without like slipping everywhere. And like I fell even at one point. Right. And I was like, hey, I need ice cleats. So then I started to look into ice cleats. And then like, once I went to ice cleats, then that led me into another interest. And like, all of a sudden you just go down this road, and you end up somewhere being interested in something that you wouldn't have even known to be interested in if you never followed the initial interest was, I want to go hiking. And my interest in hiking, like, is I want to go hiking into places that are, I want to go into places that not a lot of people go. I want to go into these like explorations, like places that are a little scary, a little dangerous, but then it started to be like, well, what gear do I need? And how do you do that? And maybe you don't want to just go for the day. Maybe you want to go for a few days, and so it just opens up down this road. Now, is there a screenplay in that? Probably. But is that why I started my interest in hiking? No, I was actually genuinely interested in hiking. And I think this is one of the key things about transformation is you don't know what you're transforming into and where that is taking you and where you're going and what will come of where you end up and what you will see when you get there. So there is a power in it. If you can just trust this little meaningless thing that seems so unimportant and so doesn't matter at all, you might realize that it has actually the raw material. It's leading you to the raw material you need to greatness in your art, right? And in life and in everything, So I don't know. I mean, the only thing that I can really say about this is where we've gotten to is I never thought we would come to this point, but I guess that's the beauty of these conversations, is that I've realized the transformative power of art is really in trusting where your true curiosities and interests lead you, and not expecting that the destination you get to next is the destination that you need to arrive at, but that destination will give you insight into many other destinations you may need to go first before you get to wherever it is you think you need to get to, which you don't even know exists yet because you haven't walked far along enough of the path to even know that you'd be looking for it. But lo and behold, one day, if you keep going down this road, you will find yourself there and be like, it's so obvious. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to share my thing, and that's where I think, it goes back to your saying earlier where you said, like, it's not art that fuels your art, it's life that fuels your art. And the life is in the curiosity, the interest, and the attention that we give things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that in art too, it's just like there's a trust in that your experience of something, your honest experience of something contains within it some kind of spark. Just hearing you talk about your experience with hiking and getting, and learning about hiking and getting, special cleats so that you could do certain things and you didn't know you needed to do that, but then you learn how to do certain things through just entering into it. And, the most experienced of hikers and as a metaphor, the most experienced of people in almost anything, you could get two people who have the same level of experience in something, sit them down together, and 100% they could sit together and they could bond over common experiences. But if they really got into it, there would be certain things that they would say. It's like, oh, wow, for me, it's like, I really do it for this reason, or I'm really doing it for this reason. There are certain parts of our experience of it that are just so, that we can share with others that maybe people, don't have the same experience of it, but can appreciate your experience of something, or maybe you can give a kind of language to something that they just haven't been able to do for themselves before, which is it's a beautiful thing to give to somebody.
Yeah.
It's a really beautiful thing to give somebody, to be able to say something for someone else where they're just like, yes, I've never been able to communicate that. I've never had the words for that, but yes, that's it. Like, and you've just done, that's a gift for people too. Right. And that's part of when you become intimate with the experience of your life and the things that you're doing and the things that you're becoming, when you share those parts of yourself, like it's a gift. It's really a gift in so many ways.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah, this has been wonderful. This whole conversation has been a wonderful little journey. And I mean, I'm going to share my beer here in a second, but I was just thinking about the Gillian Flynn and this book, Gone Girl, and that one page that I wrote, the quote that she said. I mean, it felt like someone who understood the struggle of originality and trying to create and that. And as much as I could relate to the character and the story and what they're going through, and I think it's just wonderful, I also felt like I had a fellow artist sharing a little bit of vulnerability with me too, and I don't know if she necessarily sees it that way. Like, if she sees it as that stark and harsh, but I think there's a part of us that all of us can go, what an interesting interpretation of like what we're battling with as creatives, like we're trying to push ourselves into these new worlds. And at the same time, we also feel like, wow, like we're just a fake, we're just a copy. We're just, and then like, there's so many things about like being a person and finding love, there's all these things that are snuck into all of that. It's like so profoundly deep when you could look at it. I've reread that page probably 7 times now, just garnering new information out of it. As an exercise, but anyway, this has been wonderful. Transformation is a cool thing. And I've been transformed through this conversation, and I've been realizing some things to walk away with, which I will share after. But the beer that I'm having, which I'm going to start, Evan, is, get this, it's called the Ice Cutter. It's from Snake Lake, which I've obviously featured a lot in recent months, because they're a local brewery here in Alberta. Vanilla latte stout.
Oh, yeah,
it's tasty. It's very tasty. It's very, very flavorful. It's very good. But it's also one of those beers I would say that you would almost like, it's dark, it's rich, it's flavorful. It does feel like a little bit of a vanilla coffee and beer, which is actually, they found a nice balance for it. It's nice for just kind of like chilling and drinking. And today I've been enjoying it. The other day though, I had one and I sat out in the sun and tried to drink a dark beer. And I was like, this is too much. This isn't right. Something's wrong. I need a light beer.
Yeah.
But like, where I am now is kind of cool and relaxed and nice and just chill. It's like the perfect beer for this kind of atmosphere. And I find that's a big part of our journey with the craft beers, is like atmosphere, general energy. Where am I at? What am I doing? I've really come to appreciate beers for different times and different places,
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a good one. I'd recommend it if you're in for a nice chill, especially in the winter. This would be a definite recommendation.
Yeah. Wonderful. I'm drinking actually my mother-in-law was recently over visiting the new baby, and she brought some beer, and I wasn't sure how this one was gonna go. But it's been enjoyable. I'm drinking a blackberry sangria sour.
Oh wow.
From Bad Tattoo Brewing Company, which is in Penticton, I believe. Beautiful Penticton, British Columbia. And you know what? It's good. Like I'm often very cautious about sours, but this has kind of got like enough stuff happening. It's not too sour. It doesn't kind of finish like vomit, which sometimes I find. Sometimes I've had a few sours that are like that. It's just like, wow, it's got a real nice vomit finish to it.
You're really selling the sour.
Yeah. But this one does not do that at all. It's just sort of got a nice little tartness to it. It's still beer, but yeah, it's like it's kind of got that sangria kind of like vibe to it. And so yeah, really good. Probably like one of those beers that it's like I'd sit, you can enjoy one of them very easily. I think trying to do two of them might be a bit much, but it's good. It's good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Well,
yeah.
I don't know if I have anything better to say than the things that I've already said. I think. So yeah, I don't know. I think that just that engagement with your life, that real engagement and reminding yourself that is really in so many ways what great transformative art is about engaging people with their lives to such a like pay attention to these things. Artists are just paying attention to these things, and then they show it to us like we've never seen this thing before. Going back to that quote that you shared, it's like everything's secondhand, right? But in a way, sometimes it's like maybe we're getting things secondhand, but sometimes it's just it can provide something for us to just be like, you know what? I should pay more attention to the fucking clouds in the sky. Because they really are incredible, aren't they? I should really pay attention to those little moments with members of my family or something, that just says like, oh yeah, these things are special. These things are beautiful, and let life fuel the things that you do, and get seriously interested and curious about your own life and discover what you might think and feel about it.
Yeah, this has been a nice little journey, this one. I would I so I think there is a part of it. It's like your life, as mundane as it may seem at times, and as I don't know what the right word is, but like as minimal as your struggles and your experiences may seem to you, there still is a wealth of gold in all of it. And your interpretation of things can be a pretty cool thing just to add to the pot of everything. I had a chiropractor for a little while, and he turned me on to this show called Barry, which is like about an assassin who basically joins an acting class, goes on some escapades with it. And it's really good. It's really, I personally think it's really good because there's something about it which I find really funny, because it has a quality of things that I've seen before, but it takes a quality of them and it kind of pokes fun at them. Like, I've seen gangster movies and all of that stuff, and kind of has that, but it then kind of pokes fun at it. And then it has like acting class, and I've been in those acting classes where you have this like really intense teacher that's like almost like a cult leader, like running their class, and like these students that are trying so hard, and they're, just that they have their own issues and they're totally unaware of them and stuff like that. Right. And it kind of pokes fun at that. And it kind of brings some of this silly, almost, kind of things that when you're in it, you don't really laugh at. But like, if you look at it objectively, if you look at it from the outside, you're like, oh, it's kind of silly, it's kind of funny. And I think it's a really good show. It's an HBO show, but it's like, it's a fun take on an interesting little circumstance, but like, it's done in a way where it feels a little new, a little original, And so I also think, as you're going through your art and you're trying to create original work, is, sometimes the answer is very simple. It's not, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to create something entirely new. Sometimes you just need to have a take on something that no one's ever had a take on it before. Sometimes it's just about, if maybe there's something you see about something that, no one's ever really noticed before, I think it's worth investigating and looking into, and it might lead to nothing. It might not lead you anywhere. It might be a dead end and it might not work. And I think a reminder is that art and creativity is not always about success and getting the answer. Sometimes it's just about exploring to find out where that leads and letting that be enough. And then you will go yet on another adventure and another adventure. And if you continually go on adventures of art and creativity, I think you will probably find you're at something at some point that's pretty cool and pretty interesting. And maybe it works, or maybe it leads to something that you never expected. And so, that's the power of art and transformation. And just dare to try. Let's see what happens.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.